Good morning. This is the Adult Sunday School lesson from Mount Vernon Baptist Church for November the 8th. Our study journey today continues in the book of Job. The title of our study journey stop today is Miserable Comforters. And our scripture lessons come from Job chapters 2 through 31. Our application is that the student will choose to bring real relief to those who are suffering and to offer help without being judgmental. Many chapters today will be under our belt, but let's only start with one single verse that comes out of Job chapter 2, verse 11. Now, when Job's three friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. Now, before we begin today, we must be asking once more for much prayer for those who are continuing to suffer through the virus. We have record days now, day after day, of new cases and much death. It is definitely within our church family, and we need to be much in prayer for those who are afflicted as well as those who battle it. So we ask that we be strong in prayer, never ending, not becoming weary of praying against this horrible virus. Now, when we think about the lesson that we have in front of us today, it makes sense to think about that those of us who are in our Sunday school classes in the adult section of Mount Vernon Baptist Church are, shall we say, relatively mature. And in our lives, we likely have been asked to come and talk to a friend who may be suffering. And when we go and talk to that friend, that suffering may be one of three areas. First, it could be suffering from some physical malady. In that case, we're trying to comfort those people as they seek help from their doctors and the medication that they take, and we're helping them to understand that healing will come in time. The same thing happens when there may be a mental malady, a type of situation where someone may be depressed or be under much stress, and it's up to us to listen and carefully comfort those people in their difficulty. And the third and most difficult place where we try to help friends who are suffering was when they are suffering spiritually. And this is indeed the most difficult and pressing time. It could be that they feel that their faith is now become shallow, or possibly some answers that they have been seeking through prayer have not come yet. We need to remind them in those cases that there's always three answers to every Baptist prayer: yes, no, or wait, and Baptists don't like the last two. So when we go to comfort friends who are in need, it is important that we go with the right attitude. We understand that we are there truly to comfort. Now, the other side of that coin is, from time to time, it may be that we have asked friends to come to us, to comfort us in one of those or more than one of those situations. And hopefully they came with the right attitude, and the comfort really came from the bottom of their hearts, and we were better by their visit. Today, this is the lesson that we look. We look deeply into these three friends that came to visit Job. What was their inclination? What was their action and behavior? And what did Job think about the way that they approached him when he was in such great need? Our lesson today opens with the terrible state of Job's suffering. He had lost his wealth, his health, and his children. He was too sick to function normally, and the intensity of his suffering must have been awful. We keep in mind that this suffering was not random. God had introduced Job to Satan and had described Job as a great man who shunned evil. Satan had taken upon himself to prove God wrong. God had allowed Satan to attack Job but limited Satan's work at first to not touching Job himself. And secondly, allowing Satan to bring his attack on Job's body, but not allowing Satan to take his life. Now 3 of Job's friends hear of Job's suffering. They come together to visit him, to bring comfort in these darkest days of Job's life. Our New Testament strongly teaches us that when one member of the family of God is suffering, all members suffer with him. 1 Corinthians 12:26. In this portion of the life of Job, we will see how not to counsel a suffering brother or sister who is hurting. His friends brought more pain than help. In chapter 2, we see the arrival of these 3 friends. Verse 11 tells us that they had come to know his trouble and all the evil that had come upon him. They truly seemed to want to help, but they actually provided more misery than help when they visited. The friends are named Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. A 4th friend, Elihu, will join the group in chapter 32 next week. Their purpose in coming was to mourn with him his losses and to comfort him in his grief because of those terrible losses. Their intentions seemed pure, but as they arrived, we are told that Job was in such a pitiful state that they could not even recognize him. Job 2:12. He was covered in boils, and he had scraped them all over his body. The friends wept, and then they began to mourn with him, sitting with Job for 7 days and 7 nights in silence. What possibly could they say at this moment to help and comfort him? In chapter 3, we will see Job's complaint. He was in great despair. He broke his silence and cursed his day, wishing to have never been born. In verses 11 through 19, Job wishes he had been stillborn, dying in the womb before birth. Had he died, he would have been able to avoid all that had happened. In verses 20 through 26, Job says he longs for death because of his great misery. Here we see the first time that Job acknowledges that God is allowing these afflictions to affect him. He shows us in verse 25 his greatest sorrow, which is the loss of all of his children. He had no rest. He had no peace. He had no relief whatsoever. Now in chapters 4 through 7, we begin to see the complaint against Job made by Eliphaz. Chapters 4 and 5 outline the questions that Eliphaz brings. He quickly expresses doubt as to Job's innocence. His questions seem to test Job about his true nature. He begins gently, but his words soon turn harsh. He brings up Job's actions before the tragedy had come upon him. He said Job instructed others, strengthened those who were weak, and helped many in time of need. Now he turns on Job by saying that Job is unwilling to listen to his own counsel, which he had given to others. In 4:7 through 11, we see the heart of Eliphaz was wrong in his spiritual understanding. Eliphaz uses his own experiences to prove his point, and he says that he had seen others who had reaped what they sowed. So it must be that Job is reaping the effects of some great sin. Chapter 5 is divided for us into 3 thoughts. 1 through 7 deal with those unrighteous who are born into trouble. 8 through 16 deal with Job's need to seek God and to present his case directly to him. And 17 through 27 deal with advice for Job to accept the chastening of God and to trust God more. Chapters 6 and 7 are Job's defense against the complaint of Eliphaz. First, God should go ahead and allow Job to die, as his suffering is intense. Now in verses 14 through 21, he tells Eliphaz that he's unreliable and he's unhelpful. Job rebukes his friend for presuming him guilty without evidence. Now in verses 11 through 21, Job addresses God, asking why is he the target of such a calamity. And in chapters 8 through 10, we see the complaint against Job by Bildad. He says Job will indeed bring great punishment, and therefore Job had sinned greatly. but he does not wish to admit it. And this is why the situation occurs, because Job has great sin in his past and he has simply not admitted it. Bildad believes Job is filled with hot air. If he'll just confess his sin, all his prosperity will return. In 9, 1-14, Job testifies that no man may argue with an all-powerful and all-knowing God. In chapters 10, verses 1-7, Job begins to lay out his own complaint before God. He stresses his innocence, and he desires to know why this horror has happened to him. He once more wishes that he had never been born. Now in chapters 11-14, we see the complaint of Zophar against Job. Here is a very harsh rebuke of Job by his friend. The argument is pointed and it is rude. Zophar says that while Job is suffering, that he's not suffering enough for what he must have done. In chapters 12-14, we see Job's reply. He summarizes by saying that Zophar should make no conclusion until he has heard all Job wants to say. Job is basically calling Zophar a know-it-all. In 13, verse 4, Job now says of his three friends, "Ye are forgers of lies. Ye are all physicians of no value." In chapters 15-21, the three friends renew their complaints against Job, and they're more harsh than ever, that Job is hiding a great sin and just simply will not reveal it. In 18-21, we see this, and Bildad implies that Job did not even know God. Here were deeper wounds than before from his friends, cutting far deeper into Job's heart. In chapter 19, Job says in verse 3 that 10 times his friends have caused him shame and humiliation. In chapters 22-31, two of the friends, Eliphaz and Bildad, bring a third round of accusations against Job. In chapters 26-31, Job brings his strong defense, rebuking these friends, and he continues to defend his integrity. Now in the end of this episode, in chapter 31, Job brings an end to these accusations by asking 4 questions. He questions the lust of his own eyes, and he says he is willing to give up his own wife to another if he has committed this sin. He reminds that he has spent a lifetime helping others, his servants, the poor, and orphans. Third, he assures that wealth has never been his goal. And fourth, he asks if there was truly any wicked deed that he had done and hidden away. And now in verse 40, we are told that the words of Job are ended. Paul taught us in Galatians 6 that we are not to judge a brother who suffers, and our goal is not to accuse him, but to restore him. The ministry of restoration by church members sometimes may be overlooked. Each of us will need to be comforted at some point, and we need to depend on our brothers and sisters in Christ to help us to heal from either physical or spiritual sufferings. We should support and comfort in these moments and make sure that we do not add to the misery. We will see the opinion of God concerning these three friends later on in chapter 42 when our study of Job is ending. This final lesson God will show us will surely teach us exactly how God intends for friends to act when someone is in need. I look forward to sharing that strong lesson from the Lord given in the life of Job. Next week we will meet a young man who's been listening to all these conversations, and he will bring a far different view for us to consider. I hope to see you there.